The morning sun streamed through the massive windows of Terminal C at Dallas International Airport. Travelers rushed past with their rolling suitcases, some checking their phones for gate changes, others grabbing coffee before their flights. In the middle of all this chaos sat 17-year-old David Thompson, quietly waiting for his delayed flight to Boston. David had been up since 4 in the morning. His mom had driven him to the airport, giving him one last pep talk before dropping him off. Today wasn't just any ordinary day. He was flying to Boston University for the most important interview of his young life. If things went well, he might just earn a full scholarship to study engineering. He wore his best clothes, a navy blue polo shirt his grandmother had bought him for his birthday and khakis that his mom had pressed the night before. His black dress shoes were polished to a shine. Everything had to be perfect. This was his shot at changing his family's future. David pulled out his phone and scrolled through his notes one more time. He had practiced his answers to every possible question. What are your strengths? Why do you want to study engineering? Where do you see yourself in 10 years? He knew them all by heart, but his nerves were getting the better of him. The departure board above his gate flickered. Flight 447 to Boston delayed again. What was supposed to be a 9 a.m. departure was now pushed back to 10:30 a.m. David sighed and texted his mom to let her know. She responded immediately with a heart emoji and the words, "You've got this, baby." 20 feet away, Linda Mitchell sat in the business class waiting area, tapping her manicured nails against her designer purse. She was heading to Boston too, but for very different reasons. Linda was a real estate executive flying first class to close a multi-million-dollar deal. She prided herself on being observant, always aware of her surroundings. That's when she noticed David. Something about the young man bothered her, though she couldn't quite put her finger on what. Maybe it was the way he kept checking his phone, or how he organized and reorganized the papers in his folder. He seemed nervous, restless. In Linda's mind, nervous people at airports meant trouble. She watched as David stood up to stretch his legs, walking to the large windows that overlooked the runway. He pulled out his phone and made a call. "Hey, Mom," David said quietly into the phone. "Yeah, the flight's delayed again. I'm getting worried I might miss my interview slot." His mother's voice was warm and reassuring on the other end. "Don't worry, sweetheart. You called them yesterday and explained about the flight. They know you're coming. Just breathe and stay calm." I know," David replied, running his free hand through his hair. "I just can't mess this up. This scholarship could change everything for our family." "You won't mess up," his mom said firmly. "You're the smartest, most hardworking young man I know. That interview panel is going to see exactly what I see, a future leader." Linda couldn't hear the conversation, but she didn't like what she saw. A young man pacing back and forth, speaking in hushed tones on his phone, constantly looking around. In her mind, she was connecting dots that weren't there. When David finished his call and returned to his seat, Linda made her decision. She stood up and walked over to where he was sitting. David looked up as her shadow fell across his chair. "Excuse me," Linda said, her voice tight with suspicion. "I've been watching you, and I have to say your behavior is making me very uncomfortable." David blinked in surprise. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I don't understand." "What behavior?" "The pacing, the phone calls, the way you keep looking around." Linda listed off, her voice getting louder. "You're making everyone nervous." David glanced around the waiting area. A few people were looking in their direction now, curious about the commotion. "Ma'am, I'm just waiting for my flight. I had to call my mom about the delay." "That's what you say," Linda replied, crossing her arms. "But I've been watching you for the past hour. You're acting suspicious and I don't feel safe." The words hit David like a punch to the stomach. Suspicious? He was wearing his interview clothes, carrying college brochures, and quietly waiting for his flight. What could possibly be suspicious about that? "Ma'am, I think there's been a misunderstanding," David said carefully. "I'm a high school student flying to Boston for a college interview. I'm not doing anything wrong." But Linda wasn't listening. In her mind, she had already decided that David was a threat. She had read too many news stories, watched too many crime shows. She saw danger where there was none. Other passengers began to take notice. An elderly man in a baseball cap shook his head disapprovingly. A young mother pulled her children closer. A businessman looked up from his laptop with interest. The waiting area, which had been filled with the usual airport buzz, now had an uncomfortable tension. David felt his face burning with embarrassment. He had never been in a situation like this before. His parents had always taught him to be respectful to adults, to stay calm in difficult situations. But this was beyond anything he had prepared for. "Look," David said, trying to keep his voice steady, "I can show you my boarding pass, my interview confirmation, my school ID. I'm not trying to cause any problems." Linda stepped back dramatically. "Don't you dare try to intimidate me," she said loudly enough for half the terminal to hear. "I know what I saw, and I'm not going to sit here and pretend everything is normal when it's clearly not." A TSA agent who had been walking through the terminal heard the commotion and changed direction toward their gate. Agent Martinez had seen situations like this before, and they rarely ended well. He approached cautiously, his hand instinctively moving to his radio. "What seems to be the problem here?" Martinez asked, looking between Linda and David. Linda immediately turned to face the agent. "Officer, I've been watching this young man for over an hour, and his behavior is extremely suspicious. He's been pacing, making secretive phone calls, and constantly surveying the area. I'm concerned for everyone's safety." David felt the blood drain from his face. This was really happening. He was being reported to airport security for sitting quietly and talking to his mother on the phone. "Sir," Agent Martinez said to David, "I'm going to need to see some identification." David nodded quickly and reached for his wallet. His hands were shaking slightly as he pulled out his driver's license and student ID. Martinez examined them carefully while Linda stood nearby, arms crossed, looking vindicated. "Boston University interview?" Martinez asked, reading the confirmation letter that David had also handed over. "Yes, sir," David replied. "I'm supposed to interview for an engineering scholarship this afternoon." Martinez looked at the documents, then at David, then at Linda. He had been working airport security for 8 years, and he knew the difference between actual suspicious behavior and a nervous teenager. But protocol was protocol, and when passengers expressed safety concerns, he had to take them seriously. The situation was spiraling beyond what anyone could have imagined when David first sat down to wait for his flight. What should have been a routine morning at the airport was turning into something that would change multiple lives forever. Agent Martinez looked at David's identification one more time before handing it back. The documents were legitimate: a clean driver's license, a student ID from Roosevelt High School, and an official interview confirmation from Boston University. Everything checked out perfectly, but Linda Mitchell wasn't satisfied with the quick review. "That's it?" Linda demanded, her voice rising with indignation. "You're just going to look at some papers and call it good? Anyone can fake documents these days. I'm telling you, this young man has been acting suspicious for over an hour." Other passengers were now openly staring. Some pulled out their phones, though whether to record the incident or simply stay busy, David couldn't tell. He felt like he was under a microscope, every movement being analyzed and judged. Agent Martinez sighed internally. He had dealt with countless situations like this during his career in airport security. Sometimes passengers had legitimate concerns, but more often than not, these complaints stemmed from misunderstandings or worse, prejudice. Still, he had protocols to follow. "Ma'am, I understand your concerns," Martinez said diplomatically, "but I've reviewed this young man's identification and documentation. Everything appears to be in order." "Appears to be in order?" Linda's voice cracked with disbelief. "Officer, I've been in business for 25 years. I know when someone is up to no good. This boy has been casing the terminal, making coded phone calls and acting extremely nervous. Are you really going to ignore a concerned citizen's report?" David felt his stomach drop. Casing the terminal? Coded phone calls? He had been sitting in his chair reading college brochures and talking to his mother about flight delays. How had an innocent conversation been twisted into something so sinister? "Ma'am," David said quietly, "I was just talking to my mom about my flight being delayed. I can call her right now if you want to verify that." "Don't you dare try to manipulate this situation," Linda snapped back. Making another call is exactly what someone would do if they were trying to cover their tracks. A middle-aged woman sitting nearby finally spoke up. "Excuse me, but I've been sitting here the whole time and this young man hasn't done anything wrong. He's been reading and waiting quietly just like everyone else." Linda whirled around to face the woman. "Are you kidding me? Did you not see him pacing around, constantly checking his phone, looking around nervously? If that's not suspicious behavior, I don't know what is." The woman shook her head. I saw a nervous teenager waiting for a delayed flight. That's normal behavior at an airport. More passengers began to chime in. An older gentleman nodded in agreement with the woman. I've got grandkids his age. When they're nervous about something important, they act exactly like this boy. There's nothing suspicious here, but Linda had dug in her heels. She turned back to Agent Martinez with renewed determination. Officer, I don't care what these people say. I know what I saw and I'm not backing down. This is about safety. And if something happens because you ignored my warning, that's on you. Martinez felt the familiar weight of a difficult decision. His instincts told him that David was exactly what he appeared to be, a nervous high school student traveling for a college interview. But Linda's insistence and the growing crowd meant he couldn't simply walk away. Protocol demanded that he take passenger safety concerns seriously, even when they seemed unfounded. All right, Martinez said, reaching for his radio. I'm going to call for backup to help sort this out properly. David's heart sank. Sir, please, I really haven't done anything wrong. I just want to catch my flight and get to my interview. I understand that, son, Martinez replied with genuine sympathy in his voice. But when we get complaints like this, we have to follow procedure. It's better to be thorough and clear everything up properly. As Martinez spoke into his radio, Linda turned to address the growing crowd of onlookers. Thank you all for your input, but I've been traveling for business for decades. I've seen things. I know how to spot trouble, and this situation has all the red flags. A young father holding a toddler stepped forward. Lady, the only red flag I see here is you harassing a kid who's trying to get to college. Harassing? Linda's voice pitched higher. I'm trying to keep everyone safe. In today's world, we can't afford to ignore suspicious behavior just because someone looks young or innocent. David sat back down heavily in his chair, overwhelmed by the circus that had erupted around him. This morning, his biggest worry had been whether he would remember all his interview talking points. Now he was the center of an airport security incident, being accused of behavior that existed only in one woman's imagination. His phone buzzed with a text from his mom. Flight still showing delayed on my app. How are you holding up, sweetheart? David stared at the message, unsure how to respond. How could he tell her that he was currently surrounded by TSA agents because a stranger thought his nervous energy was threatening? How could he explain that his college interview might be in jeopardy because someone had decided he looked suspicious? 2 additional security officers arrived within minutes. Officer Chen and Officer Rodriguez had been patrolling another section of the terminal when they received Martinez's call. They approached the scene with the practiced calm of experienced security personnel. What's the situation? Officer Chen asked Martinez quietly. Martinez gestured toward Linda and then David. Passenger complaint about suspicious behavior. I've checked his ID and documentation. Everything's legitimate. He's a high school student flying to Boston for a college interview. Officer Rodriguez looked at David, then at the agitated woman who was still explaining her concerns to anyone who would listen. What specific behavior is she concerned about? According to her, he was pacing, making phone calls, and looking around nervously. Martinez replied. Standard nervous traveler behavior, in my opinion, but she's insisting it's more than that. Linda overheard the conversation and immediately inserted herself. Officers, I appreciate you taking this seriously. I've been watching this individual for over an hour, and his behavior patterns are extremely concerning. He's been conducting surveillance of the terminal, making secretive communications, and displaying all the classic signs of someone planning something. David looked up at the 3 officers now surrounding him. I was talking to my mom about my flight delay, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. That's all. I'm just trying to get to Boston University for an interview. Officer Chen nodded sympathetically. Son, I believe you, but we need to follow protocol when passengers express safety concerns. It won't take long and then you'll be free to catch your flight. But even as the officers tried to handle the situation professionally, David could see the doubt creeping into some passengers' faces. Linda's dramatic accusations and the presence of multiple security officers was creating exactly the kind of scene that made innocent behavior look guilty. The gate area that had been filled with typical airport energy was now charged with tension and uncomfortable stares. David realized that regardless of how this ended, his quiet morning at the airport had become something he would never forget. The situation at Gate C-12 had transformed from a simple passenger complaint into a full security investigation. David sat in his chair surrounded by 3 TSA officers while Linda Mitchell continued to provide what she called critical details about his behavior. More passengers had gathered, some filming with their phones while others whispered among themselves. Officer Rodriguez opened a small notebook and began documenting the incident. "Ma'am, I need you to be very specific about what you observed. Can you walk me through the timeline of events?" Linda straightened her shoulders, clearly feeling vindicated by the official attention. "I first noticed him around 8:30 this morning. He was sitting over there." She pointed to David's chair. But he wasn't just sitting normally. He kept fidgeting, checking his phone constantly, and looking around the terminal in a very systematic way. "Systematic how?" Officer Chen asked. "Like he was studying the layout," Linda replied confidently. "He would look toward the security checkpoint, then at the departure gates, then at the restaurant areas. It was very deliberate, very calculated." David wanted to explain that he had been looking at the departure board to check for updates on his delayed flight. And yes, he had glanced around the terminal because that's what people do when they're waiting in an unfamiliar place. But every time he tried to speak, Linda would interrupt with another crucial detail. "Then around 9 o'clock, he started making phone calls," Linda continued. "Multiple calls, all very secretive. He would walk away from other passengers and speak in low tones. Very suspicious." "Ma'am," Agent Martinez interjected gently, "speaking quietly on the phone isn't necessarily suspicious behavior." "But it is when combined with everything else," Linda insisted. And then there was the pacing. Back and forth, back and forth. He couldn't sit still. That's not normal behavior for someone just waiting for a flight. A woman in her 50s who had been listening finally stood up. "Excuse me, officers, but I have to say something. I've been sitting right here the entire time, and what this lady is describing isn't what I saw at all." Linda turned to face the woman with obvious irritation. "And who are you exactly?" "My name is Patricia Williams, and I'm a retired teacher. I've worked with teenagers for 30 years, and I know nervous behavior when I see it. This young man has been sitting quietly, reading his papers, and yes, he made a phone call to someone he called Mom about his flight being delayed. There's nothing suspicious about any of that." Several other passengers nodded in agreement, but Linda was undeterred. "Ma'am, with all due respect, you don't understand what you're looking at. I've traveled extensively for business, and I know the signs of trouble." Officer Rodriguez looked at David. "Son, can you tell us about the phone calls you made this morning?" David's voice was shaky but clear. "I called my mom twice. Once when I first got here to let her know I arrived safely, and again when the flight got delayed to let her know about the schedule change." "That's it. And what did you discuss during these calls?" Officer Chen asked. "The first call was just to check in. I told her I was at the gate and everything was going smoothly. The second call was about the delay. I was worried it might affect my interview timing, so she helped calm me down and reminded me that I had already contacted the university about potential flight delays." Linda scoffed loudly. "That's exactly what someone would say if they were trying to cover up coded communications." Agent Martinez looked at Linda with barely concealed frustration. "Ma'am, those sound like perfectly normal conversations between a mother and son." "Do they?" Linda challenged. "How do you know he was really talking to his mother? How do you know these weren't coded messages to accomplices?" David felt like he was trapped in a nightmare. Every innocent explanation was being twisted into evidence of some elaborate conspiracy that existed only in Linda's imagination. He pulled out his phone with trembling hands. "I can call her right now," David offered. "You can talk to her yourself and verify everything I'm saying." "Don't let him make any calls," Linda said sharply. "That could be a signal to activate whatever he's planning." The absurdity of the situation was becoming clear to everyone except Linda. Officer Rodriguez exchanged a look with his colleagues that said everything they were all thinking. But protocol was protocol, and they had to see this through to the end. "All right," Officer Rodriguez said. "Let's take this step by step. Son, can you show us exactly what's in your carry-on bag?" David unzipped his small backpack with hands that were now visibly shaking. Inside were his college brochures, a folder containing his interview materials, a water bottle, a granola bar, a phone charger, and a book about engineering that he had hoped to read during the flight. Officer Chen examined each item carefully while Linda watched with intense interest, as if expecting to find evidence of wrongdoing hidden in college pamphlets. "What's this?" Linda asked, pointing to the engineering book. "It's a book about civil engineering," David replied. I'm hoping to study engineering in college, so I thought I'd read about different specializations during the flight. Or it could be research material, Linda suggested darkly. Learning about structural weaknesses, how to damage infrastructure. Agent Martinez had clearly reached his limit. Ma'am, it's a textbook about building bridges and roads, not tearing them down. But Linda was beyond reason now. She had invested too much in her theory to back down, even when faced with overwhelming evidence that she was wrong. Officers, I understand you want to believe the best about people, but we live in dangerous times. We can't afford to ignore warning signs just because someone seems polite or has a good story. More passengers continued to voice their support for David. A businessman who had been working on his laptop called out, I've been watching this whole thing, and the only person acting suspiciously here is the lady making accusations. An elderly couple nodded in agreement. We've been traveling for 40 years, the man said, and we've never seen someone get harassed for sitting quietly and reading, but the damage was already done. Despite the growing support from other passengers and the officer's obvious skepticism about Linda's claims, David was now the subject of an official security investigation. His name would be documented, his behavior analyzed, and his college interview day completely derailed. David looked at his phone to check the time. His flight was supposed to board in 30 minutes, assuming it wasn't delayed again. Even if the officers cleared him immediately, the stress and humiliation of the morning had left him feeling drained and defeated. He thought about calling his mother to explain what was happening, but Linda's earlier reaction to his phone use made him hesitate. Every action he took seemed to be interpreted as evidence of guilt, rather than the normal behavior of an anxious teenager trying to navigate an impossible situation. The crowd around Gate C12 continued to grow as word of the incident spread through the terminal. Some passengers were clearly on David's side, shaking their heads at Linda's accusations. Others seemed uncertain, influenced by the presence of multiple security officers and the dramatic nature of Linda's claims. Officer Rodriguez closed his notebook and looked at his colleagues. They all knew this was going nowhere, but they also knew they couldn't simply ignore a passenger's safety concerns, no matter how unfounded they appeared to be. The investigation would have to continue, and David's ordeal was far from over. Officer Rodriguez was about to suggest moving the investigation to a more private area when his radio crackled to life. All units, Chief Thompson is en route to Gate C12. ETA 2 minutes. The three officers exchanged glances. Chief Diana Thompson rarely left her office for routine passenger complaints. Her involvement meant this situation had escalated beyond what any of them had anticipated. David's phone buzzed in his pocket. Without thinking, he glanced at it and saw a text from his mom. Sweetheart, got called into work early. Everything okay with your flight? Love you, the simple message hit him like a punch to the gut. His mother had no idea that her son was currently the subject of an airport security investigation, surrounded by officers and being accused of planning some unnamed criminal act. She was probably expecting a cheerful update about his flight status, not a call about TSA detention. Linda noticed David checking his phone and immediately pointed it out to the officers. See? There he goes again with the secretive phone checking. Why won't you take this seriously? Agent Martinez had finally had enough. Ma'am, checking text messages is not secretive behavior. It's what literally everyone in this terminal is doing right now. As if to prove his point, at least a dozen passengers in the immediate area were visible looking at their phones, scrolling through messages or making calls. But Linda was undeterred. This is different, she insisted. Everything about his behavior is different. Why can't you see that? The crowd around Gate C12 had grown even larger, with passengers from neighboring gates drifting over to see what was happening. David could hear snippets of conversation as people tried to piece together the situation. What's going on over there? Some lady thinks that kid is dangerous. Oh, are you serious? He looks like he's barely old enough to drive. This is getting ridiculous. Then, cutting through the terminal noise, came the sound of brisk footsteps and a voice that commanded immediate attention. What's the situation here? Everyone turned to see Chief Diana Thompson approaching the scene. She was a woman in her mid-40s with an authoritative presence that immediately changed the energy of the entire area. Her uniform was crisp, her badge clearly visible, and her expression was all business. The three officers straightened up noticeably. Chief Thompson, Officer Rodriguez began. We have a passenger complaint about suspicious behavior. The complainant is concerned about this young man's activities this morning. Chief Thompson's eyes swept the scene, taking in the crowd of passengers, the three officers, the agitated woman in business attire, and finally settling on David. For just a moment, her professional composure flickered and something that looked almost like recognition crossed her face. "I see," she said carefully. "And what specific behavior has been reported?" Linda immediately stepped forward, clearly energized by the arrival of what she assumed was a higher authority, who would finally take her concerns seriously. "Chief Thompson, thank you for coming. I've been trying to get these officers to understand the severity of the situation. This young man has been conducting surveillance of the terminal, making coded communications, and displaying all the classic signs of pre-operational planning." Chief Thompson listened without interruption, her face giving away nothing. When Linda finished her dramatic recounting, the chief turned to Officer Rodriguez. "Have you verified his identification and travel documents?" "Yes, ma'am. Everything checks out. He's a high school student flying to Boston University for a scholarship interview. His documentation is legitimate, his story is consistent, and his belongings contain nothing but normal travel items and college materials." Chief Thompson nodded slowly, then looked directly at David. "Young man, what's your name?" David's voice came out as barely a whisper. "David Thompson, ma'am." There was a long pause. The entire gate area seemed to hold its breath. Chief Thompson's expression was unreadable as she processed this information. "David Thompson," she repeated slowly. "And you're traveling to Boston University today?" "Yes, ma'am. For a scholarship interview. Engineering program." David's voice was shaking, but he managed to meet her eyes. Linda, who had been watching this exchange with growing impatience, finally interrupted. "Chief, I don't understand why everyone keeps focusing on his story. Stories can be fabricated. What matters is his behavior, and his behavior has been extremely concerning." Chief Thompson finally turned her attention back to Linda. "Ma'am, I appreciate your vigilance, but I need to ask you to step back and let me handle this situation." "Step back?" Linda's voice rose in indignation. "I'm the one who reported this in the first place. I'm the one who's been watching him for over an hour. I think I deserve to be heard." "You have been heard," Chief Thompson replied firmly. "Multiple officers have documented your concerns thoroughly. Now I need you to give me space to do my job." But Linda wasn't satisfied with being dismissed. "Chief Thompson, I've been traveling for business for over 20 years. I've seen security situations in airports around the world. I know what I'm talking about. And this situation has all the red flags." Chief Thompson took a deep breath, and when she spoke again, her voice carried a weight that made everyone in the area pay attention. "Ma'am, I've been in law enforcement for over 20 years myself. I've worked airport security, street patrol, detective work, and administration. I've seen real threats and false alarms. I've dealt with genuine emergencies and manufactured crises. And what I'm seeing here is a high school student who's nervous about a college interview being harassed by someone who's letting fear override common sense." The words hit Linda like a slap. "Harassed? Fear? Chief Thompson, I'm shocked that someone in your position would dismiss legitimate security concerns as harassment." "I'm not dismissing anything," Chief Thompson replied calmly. "I'm telling you that after reviewing all the evidence and witness statements, there is no credible threat here. This young man has done nothing wrong." David looked up at Chief Thompson with a mixture of relief and confusion. Something about her felt familiar, but he couldn't place what it was. Her voice, maybe, or the way she carried herself, but that was impossible. He had never met an airport police chief before. Linda was not ready to give up. "Chief Thompson, I demand that you run a full background check on this individual. I want his travel history examined. I want his communications analyzed. This is about public safety, and I won't be dismissed." Chief Thompson's expression hardened. "Ma'am, what you're demanding is harassment of an innocent citizen. This young man has committed no crime, exhibited no genuinely suspicious behavior, and has been cooperative throughout this entire process." "But," Linda started. "There are no buts." Chief Thompson cut her off. "This investigation is over. This young man is free to board his flight, and I strongly suggest that you examine your own motivations for why you felt the need to turn a nervous teenager into a security threat." The crowd that had gathered began to murmur appreciatively, Several passengers actually applauded Chief Thompson's decisive handling of the situation. But David was still staring at the chief, that nagging feeling of familiarity growing stronger. Something about her voice when she said his name. Something about the way she had immediately taken control of the situation. Something about the way she kept looking at him with an expression that seemed far more personal than professional. And then, as Chief Thompson turned to dismiss the other officers, David saw something that made his heart skip a beat. On her left hand, barely visible beneath her uniform sleeve, was a small scar shaped like a crescent moon, the same scar his mother had gotten when he was 5 years old, trying to open a can to make him lunch. David stared at the small crescent-shaped scar on Chief Thompson's hand, his mind racing. It couldn't be possible. His mother worked in administration at a small community college, not as an airport police chief. But that scar, that voice, the way she had said his name, "Mom," he whispered so quietly that only Chief Thompson could hear. Chief Thompson's professional composure cracked for just a moment, and in that instant, David saw the woman who had made him breakfast that morning, who had driven him to the airport at dawn, who had given him a pep talk about believing in himself. The recognition was mutual and immediate. Chief Thompson's eyes widened slightly before she quickly regained her official demeanor. But the damage was done. David had seen the truth. Linda, who had been growing increasingly frustrated with Chief Thompson's dismissal of her concerns, noticed the exchange between them and immediately jumped to the wrong conclusion. "I knew it," Linda declared triumphantly. "Chief Thompson, this young man just said something to you. This proves there's a connection. This proves I was right about his suspicious behavior." The crowd around Gate C-12 fell silent, waiting to see how Chief Thompson would respond. David felt his face burning with embarrassment, not because he had done anything wrong, but because the most important day of his life had turned into a public spectacle. Chief Thompson looked at Linda, then at the crowd of passengers, then at the 3 officers who were watching the scene unfold with growing confusion. She took a deep breath and made a decision that would change how everyone understood the situation. "Ma'am, you're absolutely right. There is a connection between this young man and me." Her voice carried across the gate area, ensuring that everyone could hear what she was about to say. "David Thompson is my son." The silence that followed was deafening. Linda's mouth fell open in shock. The passengers who had been filming looked at each other in disbelief. The 3 officers exchanged glances that conveyed a mixture of surprise and understanding. "Your son?" Linda stammered. But he was acting suspicious. He was casing the terminal and making coded calls. He was nervous about his college interview and calling his mother, me, about flight delays. Chief Thompson replied firmly. The same thing thousands of young people do every day in airports across the country. David wanted to disappear into his chair. Having his mother come to his rescue was both a relief and a mortification. He was supposed to be proving his independence, his readiness for college, and instead, he needed his mom to save him from false accusations. But Chief Thompson wasn't done. She addressed the crowd of passengers, her voice carrying the authority of 2 decades in law enforcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, what you've witnessed here today is a perfect example of how unconscious bias can turn innocent behavior into perceived threats. My son was sitting quietly, reading college materials and speaking to his family about travel arrangements. These are normal activities that millions of travelers engage in every single day." Linda tried to interrupt, but Chief Thompson held up her hand for silence. However, because of his appearance, his age, and whatever assumptions were made about him, these normal behaviors were interpreted as suspicious. This is not unusual, unfortunately. It happens more often than any of us would like to admit. Patricia Williams, the retired teacher who had defended David earlier, nodded vigorously. "Chief Thompson is absolutely right. I saw exactly what she's describing. A nervous young man being turned into a threat by someone's prejudiced assumptions." Several other passengers voiced their agreement. The businessman who had been working on his laptop called out, "This whole thing was ridiculous from the start. The kid was obviously just waiting for his flight." But Linda wasn't ready to accept responsibility for what had happened. "How was I supposed to know he was your son? He was acting nervous and suspicious. I was just trying to keep everyone safe." Chief Thompson's expression softened slightly, but her voice remained firm. "Ma'am, I understand that you thought you were doing the right thing. But I want you to consider something. What if David had been any other young person in this terminal? What if his mother hadn't been the airport police chief? What if he had just been a regular teenager trying to get to a college interview? The question hung in the air, and Linda's face began to show the first signs of genuine reflection about her actions. He would have missed his interview, David said quietly, speaking up for the first time since his mother's arrival. He would have been traumatized and humiliated for no reason. He might have given up on his dreams because someone decided he looked dangerous. Chief Thompson looked at her son with a mixture of pride and heartbreak. Pride because he was handling an impossible situation with grace and maturity. Heartbreak because he had to handle it at all. David is right, she said, and this happens more often than most people realize. Young people, particularly young men of color, are often viewed with suspicion simply for existing in spaces where others think they don't belong. Officer Rodriguez, who had been quietly processing everything, finally spoke up. "Chief, how do you want us to handle the documentation of this incident?" It was a good question. There were protocols for security investigations, but this situation had revealed itself to be something entirely different from what those protocols were designed to address. "Document it fully," Chief Thompson replied. "Every detail, every witness statement, every step of the investigation. This incident is going to become a training example for how implicit bias can escalate normal passenger behavior into security concerns." David looked at his phone and realized that his flight would begin boarding in just a few minutes. The morning that had started with excitement and nervous energy about his college interview had turned into a lesson about prejudice and family bonds. "Mom," he said quietly, "I need to call the university and explain why I might be late for my interview." Chief Thompson smiled at her son for the first time since arriving at the gate. "Actually, sweetheart, I think your experience today might give you something even more valuable to talk about in that interview than anything you studied." She turned to address the crowd one final time. "I want to thank everyone who spoke up for my son today. Standing up against injustice, even in small moments like this, is how we make the world better for everyone." As the boarding announcement for Flight 447 to Boston finally came over the intercom, David gathered his belongings and hugged his mother goodbye. The hug lasted a little longer than usual, both of them processing the morning's events. "I'm proud of you," Chief Thompson whispered in his ear, "not just for how you handled today, but for everything you're working toward. That interview panel is going to see exactly what I see. A young man with character, intelligence, and the strength to overcome any obstacle." David boarded his flight with a story he had never expected to tell in a deeper understanding of both the challenges he might face in life and the strength he had inherited from his mother. Linda Mitchell remained in the terminal, finally forced to confront the reality of what her assumptions had nearly cost an innocent young man. As Flight 447 pulled away from the gate, Chief Thompson returned to her office with a new training module to develop and a renewed commitment to ensuring that what happened to David would happen to fewer young people in the future. The morning that had started as a routine college interview trip had become something much more significant, a reminder that change often begins with individuals having the courage to stand up for what's right, even in the most unexpected circumstances.